There was a famous quote where somebody said, they don't they aren't able to define pornography, but they know it when they see it. What has that got to do with mental illness? Very little, except for this idea of stigma. A lot of people don't know what it is. They can't define it, but they know it when they see it. Stigma. We're going to talk about that today on STP.
Welcome to Shattered the podcast.
Sharing the lived experience of mental illness on
A father,
a mother.
A family.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
all right, in the words of South Park, stigma is bad. Stigma is very bad. I did not understand stigma. I did not recognize it. I was not able to see it when it was directed towards me. And I think that a lot of times people confuse misunderstanding with being stigmatized. Now, how did I first find out about stigma? Well, obviously, well, not obviously, but my first experience with stigma was when I first got my diagnosis of being mentally ill. When I found out that I had PTSD, which was subsequently updated later to complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I had self-stigma. I hated the fact that my mind was broken. And every negative stereotype that people have about mental illness, I had about myself. That I was pathetic, that I was hopeless, that I was a loser, that I was not able to bring anything good to the table, and that my life essentially was over. And I hated myself, quite simply. I detested myself. And it's a funny thing when you cannot stand yourself. We all know what it's like to be mad at somebody. We all know what it's like to have that one person that we just cannot stand. You don't want to be around them. You don't want to look at them. You don't want to think about them. Well, this is what it was like for me. For a good 3 years, I never looked in a mirror. And I didn't realize till one day when I actually did look in a mirror and I didn't recognize myself. That's how much I hated myself. I didn't even want to look at myself. So if I was brushing my teeth or something in front of a mirror, I would just have my gaze averted. Imagine that. The person that you hate, the person that disgusts you is yourself. And you can never get away from it. You know, sometimes out of sight is out of mind. So the person that you hate is not around you, so you don't have to think about them. But what about when you cannot get away from them? The closest experience would be somebody at work that you can't stand. You've got a job that you love, that you want to do, and there's just one person there that you can't stand. You will do everything in your power to not interact with them. And that's how I felt about myself. Strangely, I did not get to a point of hopelessness in that self-hatred period. I didn't try and take my life, although it was something I thought about every second of every day. In many ways, I am grateful for my cowardice because I'd worked with people with disability. If I was going to kill myself, I needed to die. I couldn't make myself disabled. I know that I couldn't live like that. And that was probably the thing that I was most afraid of, is not succeeding and injuring myself, which is now why I say I'm so grateful that I never had a gun. If I had had a gun in the house, I believe I know without a shadow of a doubt that if I could have just grabbed a gun, pulled the trigger, everything would have been over in a split second. That would have happened. Wouldn't have been something I planned or thought about. It would just be like this at this moment. This seems like a good idea. So what I had was self-stigma. And that was the biggest one for me to get over. Now, stigma itself, I faced this a few times in my life. One time, a colleague, when I was working at a radio station, she was just commenting on me in person, and she said, it's really strange, Mark, because when you're on air, you're bright, you're funny, you're engaged, you're hilarious, you're such a nice person. Why are you not like that when you're not on air?" What I didn't realize at the time, and what I didn't notice and fully understand about this interaction, is that I was being stigmatized because I wasn't the same all the time. Now, when I was on air, it was an amazing experience because you're absolutely in the moment. As soon as you press that microphone button, when you're live on air on live radio, and there's thousands of people listening, potentially tens of thousands, you um you're in the moment. I'm not thinking about how much my life sucks. I'm not thinking about how much I hate myself. All I'm thinking about is, what am I going to say next? I'm writing segments. I'm interviewing somebody. I'm writing their name. I'm writing things. I'm constantly. What's the next song that's going to play? How many minutes do I have until the end of the hour? Have I got planned for next hour? Is an interview going to happen? Am I going to be able to interview them? Are they going to show up? What do I do if they don't show up? It's the ultimate mindfulness exercise. And in that moment, I was able to be what I believe to be my true self: confident, engaged, l- with absolutely no doubt about myself. In that moment, knowing that I had the ability, if I focused and I tried hard enough, to do it and do it well. Thing is, it took so much energy to do that. I used to do a show in the afternoons, a drive time show. At the end of it, I was absolutely wrecked, but I still had all this adrenaline. So I couldn't go home and go to sleep because the adrenaline would be with me for hours. Now, the conversation that I had with this person was, how do I explain to her that you and I are in a situation now where we're talking, and in an hour I have to go on air, and in an hour I have to be that person that you're expecting me to be on air, that bright, happy person. And to do that, I need to husband my energy. I need to conserve my emotional energy so that I can have this outburst when I go on air. She didn't understand that. And it didn't make any sense to her. And to her, she just thought I was a liar. Like, whenever I went on air, I was acting. And to a certain extent, I was. Like, I was acting like I didn't have problems. Because I was in the moment, because I was so able to just focus on right now, I had a clarity and a purpose that I didn't have outside of being on the air. Now, it was really difficult to have that conversation in the aftermath because it makes you question everything about yourself. Well, it did for me. It made me look at myself and say, well, am I a liar? Am I deceitful? And it didn't help that. So on radio, not everything you hear is live. So one day, my kids had gone away to a camp, and they were coming back, and they'd been away a week, and I missed them and I wanted to be with them, but they were getting back in the middle of what was normally my show. So I went in that morning and I pre-recorded the show, meaning I did the show as if it was live, but I did it like 5 hours earlier. I then showed up at the place, and it was really weird because people were sitting in their cars listening to my show, and I could hear it. And I got a bit of a giggle out of that. I thought, oh, cool, people are actually listening. One woman got really mad at me. She's like, what's this? You're on air. You're about to do an interview. I said, yeah, no, I recorded the interview like 2 weeks ago. And I wanted to be here to pick up my kids today. So I just pre recorded the rest of the show. She was outraged that what she was listening to might not be 100% me, 100% live. That took me as odd. But my point here is people's perception of things can be really weird. And that had nothing to do with my mental illness, but it just showed the expectation that people have when, you're on air and people are like, oh, okay, this is him talking to me personally. It hurt when you would let people down. And it hurt when I felt that I'd let this woman down, this woman that had asked me why I wasn't the same all the time. And, even now, it makes me sad. Um, and I don't know that that was her intention. And I don't even know if she knew that I had a mental illness. I'd been fairly open about it at that stage, and a lot of people did know. But there was a long time when I just hid it. I just didn't tell people that I had a mental illness, particularly when I went on radio. Um, I just wouldn't talk about it at all. Um, and then the story goes, I accidentally mentioned something at the end of an interview. I was interviewing a ultra marathon runner or something like that, somebody that had done a run for mental health awareness. And I just said, look, as somebody that's gone through mental illness, I want to thank you. And that was how I kind of outed myself to the world. And that again talks to that idea of stigma, that idea that I had to out myself as being a person that has a mental illness, and I was nervous about the consequences. All right. So, stigma. What is it? um, Depending on your definition, it is a stain on somebody's person or character or something that they've done. It's a it's something that's seen as uh, a, a failure, a fault, uh, something that is disgraceful. This stain of mental illness. It actually describes it pretty succinctly. But in essence, it's treating somebody badly because of a trait that they have. So prejudice or against race is basically stigma. You can intertwine the two words, prejudice, stigma. There's different sides of the same coin. If somebody is being stigmatized, that is a form of prejudice against them. Now, in the mental health world, it's difficult because at what point does behavior become mental illness and when is it just behavior? My daughter was coming home from work the other day and she was confronted by a guy that was clearly mentally ill, a homeless man. And I was so impressed that she was able to recognize that. And even though he came to her in a rather abrupt manner, she was able to have compassion for him and treated him like a human being. So he came up and said, I want $100 million. She laughed and said, huh, I don't have $100 million. Can you give me $100 million? And they had a bit of a laugh about it. Although this man was clearly mentally ill. My daughter's reaction, I think, dictated that interaction. If she hadn't responded with kindness, if she had oh, get out of here, you stupid, blah, blah, blah. But she realized that this guy was talking out of turn. He was a stranger. He was saying things that were, in essence, crazy. So instead of going, oh, you stupid rat bag, go get a job, she just had a laugh with him. She recognized him. She didn't validate him. She didn't have any money to give him. But her kindness in her response, her willingness to just go, okay, this is not a dirty homeless man who is crazy and I need to avoid like the plague. And the thing is, my daughters know how to defend themselves. I've made sure that they've learned that if somebody physically attacks them, that they can do something about it. And my oldest daughter is dangerous. I've experienced one of her kicks at full power, just in a sparring session. I said, just full power, just hit the pads, full power. She nearly knocked me over. So I'm very, very confident in her ability to defend herself. So maybe taking the fear out of that situation, she was a girl walking by herself, maybe that helped. But I truly believe that it's the way that she interacted with this person. Instead of treating him like garbage, she treated it as kind of like a joke. Hey, how's it going? Sorry, man, I haven't got $100 million. Don't have any money. Okay, have a good night. I said at the beginning that you don't really understand stigma until you've experienced it. I had not experienced blatant stigma until face masks. The first time I tried to put on a face mask, and somebody asked me about this. They said, you talk into a microphone all day. How different is it to have a mask over your face? Well, it's extremely different for me psychologically. It feels like somebody's putting their hands around behind my back. So even as I mime that while I'm doing it, I can feel my shoulders start to shiver with that. Somebody's watching me, somebody's behind me. And it just feels like they're clamping their hands over my mouth. And I start to hyperventilate. It brings on panic attacks. And even if it doesn't go to a full blown panic attack, it really affects my mental health. Uh, First day I wore one, I was like, no, it's the law. It's easy. I'm going to do it. I put it on, struggling, was going through doing the shopping, got about halfway through the store, and I had to rip the thing off my face. I knelt down beside the cart and I was just breathe, breathe, breathe. Everything's okay. Everything's all right. It's okay. Okay. And went to the doctor the next day and he said, mate, you shouldn't be wearing a mask for mental health reasons. Okay. All well and good. In my mind, I've done everything that I legally need to do to not wear a mask. People went nuts about you not wearing a mask, and it's the new season of COVID has brought it back a hundredfold. This instead of just saying to somebody, "Oh mate, do you need a mask?" This, "Where's your mask? You have to put a mask on. You can't come in here without a mask on." And then I went into a doctor's surgery, and there's signs everywhere: "No entry without a mask." It's like, well, I don't know how I'm supposed to show up for a doctor's appointment if I can't come inside. I went inside and it was instantly, "Where's your mask?" And it wasn't asked in a way of, oh, maybe he forgot it, maybe he left it in the car, maybe he's so distracted that he wasn't thinking about it. It was accusatory. What the hell is wrong with you? Can't you see all the signs? Why aren't you wearing a mask? It's the same doctor's office that gave me the exemption. I said, mate, I have an exemption. She said, all right, well, you need to go and sit outside. I said, hang on a second. I have to go sit outside. It was like 5 degrees. And I have to go and sit outside. Like, she doesn't know that I don't feel the cold. But instantly, it was like, why do I have to go and sit outside? She's like, if you don't have a mask on, you can't be inside. Well, the law states that if you have a valid reason for not wearing a mask, you cannot be discriminated against. And she thought I was really upset. And I wasn't upset. I was just outraged that my rights were being stamped on. I'd explained to her that I had an exemption. I explained to her that it was one of the doctors in her very office that gave me the exemption. And she was still saying, well, you have to go and sit outside. It's like, okay, I'm not sick. I have no symptoms. I've been cleared by ACT Health as not having COVID. And still, I have to sit outside. Might seem like a nothing experience. But when it happens once, twice, three times, when the mask mandates stopped, I loved how some store people, some shop people, tellers, as soon as you walked in the store, they would just say, "Mate, did you need a mask?" It's all they said. And I was able to just say, "Thanks, mate. I have an exemption. Is that okay?" And it just became this nice kind of, "Hey, it's fine, man. If you've got an exemption, go to town." They saw me washing my hands as I was going in. I made sure I made all those outward signs that I'm complying as much as I possibly can. But then there was the day where a shop person came up to me, and I didn't realize that they'd had an incident earlier in the day with somebody that just didn't want to wear a mask. It's not that they had an exemption, they just didn't want to. And the cops showed up, and it was all very bad. Now, this little girl comes up to me and goes, "Where's your mask?" I said, I've got an exemption. Thank you, though. And it was insisting. It's like, "You have to wear a mask." It's like, well mate, I've got a legal exemption. I am allowed to come in. Where's your exemption? Well, at that stage, I was told explicitly by the ACT government that you didn't have to carry your papers proving that you were clean or approved. Uh, this idea of these papers, it made me sick, having to carry around these papers so that people would not lose their minds about me not wearing a mask. 99.9% of the time, people were generally okay about it. And they learned that confronting somebody as they come into a store and saying, "Where's your mask?" is not real great customer service. And then there were the people that would say, I'd say, "I have an exemption." They'd say, "Well, I have to see it." Well, I've read the law because I've been under it so hard, and I know that you do not have a right to see it. I have to present it to police and in certain healthcare situations, which is understandable. I get it. And the one time a cop did ask me, I was able to pull it out, handed it to him, realized that handing people a piece of paper was probably not COVID smart. So I just put it on my phone and I'd hold it up for people. And they'd say, "Oh, well, I'm going to take your phone so I can read it better." It's like, "Excuse me, but we're supposed to be 1.5 meters apart and you're going to take my phone off me?" This girl, she got really upset at me. "Why aren't you wearing, you have to wear a mask. Show me your exemption." The manager of the store and another staff member who I don't remember at all, but my wife told me about it, both came over and they were angry at me. And I'm trying to bring up the law on my phone. I'd left the exemption at home because I was told I didn't need to carry it with me. If the police stopped me and asked me about it, I could tell them and they could look it up and they would see that, yes, I have an exemption. But I was not told that I needed to present it to every store. And the thing is that the store owners thought that they were culpable for letting somebody in. And that was not the case at all either. The law said that if somebody says they have an exemption, you are allowed to give them the benefit of the doubt. If you are really concerned that they don't have an exemption, call a police officer and a police officer can legitimately ask the reason why you have an exemption. When it became really horrible is when people would say, "Why? Why do you have an exemption?" What do you say in that situation? I don't know them. I don't know who they are. I'm just a person in the shops. And now I have to explain somebody my mental health diagnosis. These people surrounded us. I think the situation was most jarring for my wife. But for me, all of my outward symptoms came back. I started stuttering. My hands were shaking. I couldn't even press the buttons on my phone. I was shaking so much. And the guys talking at me, and I said, "Look at me. Can you not see that something is desperately wrong with me?" It's funny, I haven't said this out loud for a while. I haven't thought about it in a while, but it might seem like nothing, but you felt exposed. You felt like somebody has to know this super personal piece of information about you so that you can exist. Now, of course, my experience does not equate to race or gender identity or that sort of thing. I know it's different, but it's intensely personal and it's something that I can't help. And while my experience was nothing like what some of those people have gone through, I can understand. You become wary. Is this going to be the person that's going to demand that I prove my identity, that I have to expose myself to? Is that person going to be the person that I have to expose myself to? It was funny because when people saw the paper, saw the mental illness, they were instantly, "Oh, yeah, no worries, mate. Come on in, come on in." But it was only after I'd had to expose myself. Now, if it had been earlier in my treatment, I would not have been able to do that. I would not have been able to tell somebody what was wrong with me so that I could go into their store. I probably would have just flown into a rage and gone home. So, that in essence is stigma. Somebody finding something out about you and then treating you differently because of it. It was funny because even little kids in the shops, you'd hear them talking to their mums. "Mum, that man doesn't have a mask on." "Shh, honey, don't say it too loud. He can hear you." You become paranoid. Which person is going to treat me less than next? You do. You retreat. You just go home. You just, all of those feelings that you have about yourself, that you're worthless, that you're hopeless, that you're not good enough, you just go home and take a bath in those because that's how you feel. Why do we have stigma against people with mental illness? I think for most people, it's just they don't understand. We've seen so many movies throughout history where the bad guys always, there's always something mentally wrong with them. There's something wrong with them. They're not just a murderer, they had mental illness problems. It's on the news. A man stabbed a person and he had a mental illness. It's like, well, okay, I get it, but could it not just be a man stabbed somebody and then in the courts they talk about whether it was because he had a mental illness? Why does it have to be this thing that, well, if somebody does something terrible, they must have a mental illness? It's not that they're just a jerk or a horrible person and they've done something terrible. It's, oh, they've got a mental illness. Oh, I get it. How is it shown? Most often for me, it was in the workplace. It was people treating me in ways that you would consider to be unacceptable. For me, in one workplace, it was passive aggression. Somebody that was passively aggressive against me. And I'm not good at passive aggression. I'm really not. I'm good at aggression. So I have trouble when I try and think of examples. It's like what I said at the beginning. I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it. Um, and that's passive aggression. It's like a drill in my head. And then it wasn't until a mate of mine said, "Well, mate, it's because they're aggressive." We put passive in front of it and it kind of excuses it. But he said they're coming at you in an aggressive stance. They're attacking you. They've come to you with a supposition and you're responding to that. Now, me with no fight or flight, I only have fight now, trying to learn flight. I respond in kind. Somebody says something to me, I see it as an attack, I respond in kind. This person, their passive aggression just was constant. And 99% of the time I could ignore it. But that 1% time when I couldn't, and then all of a sudden it became, well, you're getting out of control. Maybe you need to go outside and control yourself because you have a mental illness. And it's like, hang on, because I've got a mental illness, I can't get a little bit heated. What do you think is going to happen in this moment that I'm a little bit upset about something? Do you think this is going to be the thing that makes me murder everybody in the building? It was horrible. If I wasn't that happy person that I was on air, all of a sudden it was my mental illness and I needed to sort myself out. Not, hang on, your behavior is reprehensible and I've responded to it. It's this idea that everything that happens because of my mental health. They have no ownership over their behaviors because my mental health is the thing that we have to be guarded against. I saw you getting excited and you weren't happy, and I felt really threatened. And it's like, well, but you were across the room. You were 3 tables away. I was sitting down. I made sure I was sitting down. I was making myself as small as I could in the chair because I wasn't enjoying the discussion. And you felt threatened because of my mental illness. No, that's not on. That's not right. It can come up anywhere. Parents, I know of a woman, I heard a story the other day. They had a new neighbor move in across the road. The kids, they had 2 kids exactly the same age as their kids. The kids got on like a house on fire. It was just a wonderful street experience, kids growing up as kids. She had to go into hospital, to the psych ward, spent an extended period of time there. When she came out, she asked the kids why they weren't playing together. And her kids said, well, their mum found out that you were in a psych ward and we're not allowed to play with them anymore because of this thought of what could happen. What can we do about it? For those of us that are facing the stigma, need to have a look at ourselves first. Need to be confident in where you're at. Am I doing the best that I can? Well, that's fine. Am I being the best that I can be in any given situation? And if I am, then that's good. Do I have to leave things early? Do I sometimes do the Irish goodbye where I don't say goodbye to anybody, I just disappear? Do I sometimes get too emotional and have to remove myself from situations? That's not failure, that's success. That's knowing that a situation is not healthy for you and finding a healthy way out, even if it doesn't meet with societal expectations. Just the fact that you are taking care of yourself the best way you know how is great. And it's good and it's important and you need to keep doing that. But for the people that are around us, listening to this show is a step in the right direction, because if you're listening to this, you're genuinely trying to understand this issue. And acceptance comes through understanding. Let's look at the race relations in America in the 60s and 70s. There was a lot of white people that did not understand that they were racist, and they clearly were. But they'd just been told Negroes are bad at this and they don't have good eyesight and they can't be this and they can't be that. They listened to that propaganda and they accepted that as truth. But when they finally started to understand, hang on, these people are people. They're not different from you. They don't have any disqualifying factors. They're not less than, they're the same as. Now, everybody takes care of their mental health. Everybody does. Everybody's aware of the things that make them happy, things that give them joy, things that they know that they can't do because it makes them feel sad. That's people taking care of their mental health. Everybody does it. Just for some people, it's easier. Just because it's easier, they don't recognize that it's harder for somebody else because they don't understand. But when they do understand, when I'm able to explain to them that my behavior is not dependent on theirs, and perhaps they are doing something that is triggering, can we have a conversation about it? In the job I was telling you about, it disintegrated very, very quickly. I was accused of being a bully. And it all came down to the fact that the person that was on the other side of the table did not understand my mental illness. She said to me, "Sometimes I cry about this place because you make it so hard." It's like, well, sometimes I have to sit in the car and slap myself in the face so that I'll go upstairs and do my job. Tell me about the difficulties that you're having, because I can guarantee that mine are worse. She had no concept that my mental illness was as bad as it was. Now, whose fault is that? Maybe it's mine for not sitting down and talking about it enough. I don't know. In the end, I think it was her, because this passive aggression, she just went on the attack. Everything was my fault. And it's sad because they're a lovely person. And I missed the job. Honestly, I missed the job. What can you do about stigma? If you've got somebody in your life that has a mental illness, somebody that you love, somebody that you care about, have a conversation with them. Ask them what it feels like to be in their head. And I'm not talking about when they're upset, go up and, "I want to talk to you about this." Do it carefully. Do it gently. "Mate, I'd like to sit down and talk to you about some of the difficulties that you've been having. I know that I can't fix you. I just want to understand." That is the best and only way that you're going to be able to work with somebody around you that has a mental illness. As soon as I get an inkling that a coworker is struggling with mental health, I approach the subject in an appropriate way. In the workplace, generally I'm one of the senior people. So I'm able to take people aside and say, "Mate, I've just noticed that you're having a little bit of difficulty. Is there anything that I can do to help you?" And as soon as a person knows that you're on their side, that there's nothing that they can say that's going to change your mind or change the way you see them, they will open up. Now, of course, there's danger in any social interaction. Do I want to open myself up to this person? What kind of person are they? But you find that if you are just open and honest and you just have that discussion in a way that the person doesn't see as an attack or leaves them frightened, just, "Mate, I want to talk about it. When would be a good time to talk about it? Could we go and have a cup of coffee or something? Would that make you feel better? Should we go into the conference room and just sit down and have a chat? Because all I want to do is find out what I can do to support you. What is the best way that I can support you?" And I've done that for groups of people. Walked into a room and said, "All I want to know, all I want you guys to tell me is what you need and what you need from me. And if you have ideas to make the place better, if something is there that is not so good, I want you to let me know." giving people ownership over that conversation, giving them ownership over that situation so that they feel in control. They don't feel talked down to. And I am talking about in family life, not just in work life. If somebody knows that you're not tolerating them, because that's what we feel like when we've got a mental illness, that everybody around us secretly hates us and they just tolerate us because they have to. As soon as a person realizes that you aren't seeing them as less than, you're seeing the better parts of what they can bring to the table, the best parts. I had a guy who was talking to me about it once and it changed my perspective. And I didn't realize at the time, but we were talking about my mental health. And he said, what you have to do in a workplace is you have to find the high performers, the people that do the absolute best. And then you have to weigh up the good against the bad, because there's always going to be a downside to every person in every situation. There's always a downside. Does the good outweigh the bad? And if it does, you do everything you can to support that person. Now, in a family situation, it's different. You don't have that value judgment. But being judged by your merits, being judged by what you can bring to the table, rather than what, say, perhaps isn't as good and as valuable. Just weighing those up and realizing that you can focus on the good. You can tolerate the bad as long as you know that you know what's going on. It sounds so weird. It sounds so basic and simple and useless. But if you can see the good in someone and you can allow yourself to see that and see that it so outweighs the bad, and you view a person through that lens rather than, sometimes he speaks in a way that I don't really like, rather than just going, hey, most of the time they're unbelievable. Part of the time they can be a little bit difficult. That's okay. Stigma, I believe, is a choice. I believe that we choose in our own way whether somebody is equal to or less than us. And unfortunately, most of us have been conditioned by society to see people with mental illness as less than, as being dangerous. For most of us, nothing could be further from the truth. The only person in my life that is truly at risk of being hurt is myself. I'd never hurt the people around me. But myself, it's a very different story. That's something that they don't tell you in the movies. That's something that they don't talk about with mental illness. Is a person with mental illness is far more likely to hurt themselves than hurt anybody else. And mental illness is not a death sentence or a curse. It's something that people are trying to learn to live with. When we see it like that, when we see see a person with mental health issues as a person that's just doing the best that they can, we see them in a much better light. I want to thank you so much for listening today. I want you to get involved. Let me know where I've dropped the ball in this one. Have you been stigmatized? What has it been like? What has it felt like to you? I want to know. Drop a comment. Let us know. Shattered the podcast. More to come. See you later. Thank you for listening to Shattered the podcast. I'd like to thank our producer Meredith Brosnan, our executive producer Torian Lau, and the band Adelaide for allowing us to use their song as our theme. Go to shatteredthepodcast.com for more information.